Well, Brother Mustafa, there's a lot going on, and we brought you on the show because, one of the most, at least appealing reasons to kind of bring you on the show is because of the recent articles with the Middle East Eye publishing things about Sheikh Nuh and his some of the allegations of abuse related to that whole is it compound or it's called the
Yeah, it's
Zawi,
not
right?
it's not really a compound.
Yeah,
It's a neighborhood,
a neighborhood.
and I mean, just to clarify, there are actually Christians who live in this neighborhood. So,
Yeah.
people have a misunderstanding that somehow this neighborhood is sort of like a commune or a compound or gated off or something like that. And it isn't. It's a neighborhood of it's called Hayal Kharabsha. It's in Sports City, and I think I just want to summarize these complaints in a few statements, and they are: when I become caliph one day, libeling people for things that you can sue them for will be illegal. Either sue someone, or pardon me, shut up.
Yeah.
If you really have a case against the person, then sue them or call the cops at the very least. And merely, writing these articles, it's basically an Islamic extension or an excuse of a journalistic extension of cancel culture. Please, if you have a case, contact the authorities. Otherwise, you're just trying to cover up. I'm speaking to the people who wrote these articles.
Hmm.
You're just trying to cover up the fact that you were failed parents and failed husbands. That's basically the summary. If you have a
Ooh,
case, call the police.
I like it.
And even the Middle East Eye, um, you know, I really lost a lot of respect for them when they tried to drag Prince Ghazi into this. He has nothing to do with this. His case is always, if you have his statement is always, if you have a case, then call the police, discuss it with the authorities. Otherwise, there's no one that has any special treatment. We're all under Jordanian law here, and
Well,
that's basically just the summary.
a lot of those people might say that the police in Jordan wouldn't care much about disciplining kids with physical abuse. So this is why we had to take the approach though that we did. I'm not saying it's the right thing to say, but this is what
Yeah.
they would respond with.
No, it's not. It's not true. Disciplining children is illegal. There's Himayat al-Usra. There's the branch of the police that is specifically connected to protecting families. And I called the police on the school, Fatua. So that's my claim to shame. And you know what happened to me in this neighborhood? Absolutely nothing. I still interact with Sheikh Nuh. I still interact with Sahl. And things are fine. I called the police on the school when I had concerns, and they weren't being heard, and life goes on.
Well, yeah, what's one of those things? It's strange because it seemed like one of those some people who you had mentioned in your Facebook post regarding the subject was that some of the people who were complaining were his most almost extreme supporters. They're people who had completely relegated their thinking and their and, you called it the surrogate brain. They
Yeah,
wanted someone who just did all the thinking for them, and these were the people who were the most supportive of me, at
they
least in an extreme way. And now
yeah
they're like complaining. So tell us a little bit about
they
that.
were essentially Stepford Murids, the Stepford wives. So these were like the Stepford Murids, and when I sent this my write up to a Canadian who used to live in the High. And he told me two things, and I'm guilty on both charges. He says, number one, you think you're smarter than everyone else. Guilty as charged. Because I basically said, I put up that meme where that kid is looking at the butterfly, and the kid written underneath it is Kharabshans, people who live in Kharabsha, and then the butterfly is thinking, and then the question is this halal? It's like, you made no effort to think, and I'm not talking about smarter or dumber as physical abilities. I'm talking about, as Bonhoeffer referred to stupidity as an immoral choice. They chose not to use their brains. They chose to sit by and watch as things were happening, and now they're making up for it by writing this this terrible long article. So guilty as charged, I am smarter than them, and I'm not talking about IQ. I'm talking about that I chose to use my brain. Number two, he said, well, you know what? He said, and the guy's like, he's a friend of mine, but he's also quite frank. He said, you were always at the bottom of the barrel in terms of what it's like. No one wanted to be like you. You know what I mean? You were perceived as being like you were a failure as a Sufi. And
my life story.
Yeah, exactly. You know, there are people who are mentally retarded, and there are people who are spiritually retarded. I fit into the latter category, and I'm okay with that. You know, and you know, it's so he got so he basically addressed my issues with those 2 points. And so what I'm saying is that you had a lot of people who were basically who were, whenever I would discuss issues, whenever I would discuss anything, bring anything up in a group, I was removed from groups. I was told to shut up. I was told to stop making a fitna. You know what? I'm the guy who walks into work, flips people off, tells them they suck, and quits. These people were the types who work for 10 years, never making a complaint, and then one day come in and shoot everyone. It's like, why didn't you guys just say something, you know, while these things were happening, instead of waiting all this time?
When it was
so
convenient. Yeah. So Mustafa, real quick. So some of our audience is not really familiar with the whole shenanigan or whatever it is, the whole event that's happening. Can you maybe just kind of recap, because I think that will probably help the listeners understand exactly what we're speaking about here, if you don't mind doing that.
I mean, a lot of what was in the Middle East Eye and later in the Muslim Matters article is, you know, it's a series of allegations, and I can't comment on what I didn't see or what I don't know, right? And so there were claims that, you know, these claims of child abuse sound far more sinister than they actually than what actually happened. What happened was some spanking. Was it, if that spanking was beyond the limits of the Sharia, then no one can defend that. End of discussion, right? There was also, I mean, there were some people who were running the school who were, you know, they seemed to have really deep set problems, and they were a bit messed up, and so there was emotional damage, there was psychological damage, and what I know is that Shaykh Nuh dealt with that capably.
Okay,
that's all I know.
So just to be clear, these allegations, are they made against Shaykh Nuh himself, or is it people under him, or how does that work? I mean, who are they accusing this of?
Matters what allegations. You know, it's like, if you look at the Muslim Matters article, it starts with the definition of spiritual abuse.
Yeah.
You cannot be part of a Sufi tariqah without being subject to such spiritual abuse. Like, what planet do these people come from? I can't remember, if someone wants to be so kind as to dig up the Muslim Matters article and look at the first initial definition of what spiritual abuse is, and just read it out, and then let's just discuss.
Yeah, let me.
Are there any Arab or Persian tariqas that do not subject you to spiritual abuse? Seriously, you know, by that definition. So I mean, it matters. If you're talking about, I'm a little brown snowflake, and he hurt my feelings because, you know, then yeah, I guess he's guilty. Guilty as charged. But what did they expect? I mean, this is not Sesame Street,
Okay,
right?
I got
it. So yeah, go ahead.
So it says, by the way, before giving a long introduction about what, you know, they're not attacking the Shadili Tariqa, they're just saying that this is blah blah. They go on to now speak about spiritual abuse, and the title heads, "What is spiritual abuse?" And they go on to say, spiritual abuse involves a repeated pattern of, nice, an ad coming to me. Okay. A repeated pattern of coercion and controlling behavior in a religious context. One Muslim practitioner's definition of spiritual abuse.
Okay, it's just so let's just stop there at that definition. Okay? The next definition is a lot more involved. Okay. But let's just stop at that definition.
So because coercion and controlling. behavior.
Right, coercion and controlling in a spiritual context. So that would mean, like, for example, making your murids go hungry. For example, making them experience physical pain because they're standing up in prayer for hours. All things that Sufi sheikhs would do in the past. So Persian and Arab Sufism, by this definition of spiritual abuse, all tariqas are guilty.
Oh, and sorry, if you can just enlighten us on that. You said something about standing up in prayer and being hungry, right? And I think that needs to be unpacked for people to understand actually why tariqas did this and why people actually joined the tariqa in order to go through that. They did it willingly on their own, right? So
Absolutely.
right. So they wanted to be a part because they knew that they need to get rid of certain ailments that they believe, in which the hadith actually refer to is qillat ta'am, lessening of your food, right? Standing up
Correct.
in prayer when everyone else is asleep. So that I think is something that's very much misunderstood. Number one, of when they're referring to, in what you're referring to as coercion, and is because people actually willingly, grown adults, and sometimes they'll take their own children to these places or a part of a sheikh or his system in order to seclude themselves, whether temporarily or for a long period of time, away from the world, which is completely absent of Allah. So you need to basically come back to your fitrah, and you need to lessen some resources that you're very heavily dependent on to depend on Allah, right? So I think that this is a very, very important point for people to understand before, like you mentioned, talking about coercion. What was the other word? Compulsion?
Coercion and controlling
Yeah.
behavior in a spiritual.
Yeah, and in which like
religious context.
look who they're actually attempting to pander to when they're mentioning this, right? Because people actually, when they hear those words, they think it's like borderline blasphemous or something that you're doing to somebody, right? But they don't realize this has always been the case.
But Mustafa,
conditioning.
I think this definition extends. I mean, this could technically, the way they're defining it, could be applied to even just a person who's a regular Muslim. Like, for example, an imam telling someone, "Hey, if you continue doing certain sins, this will take you to the hellfire." Right? Is that not controlling or coercion? Like saying they're trying to spiritually. I mean, Allah uses the idea of Jannah Nar to motivate people.
Right.
If the Shaykh does that,
Correct.
then what's the difference?
That's what I'm saying. It's a very manipulative way of using words.
Yeah, but
in
anyways,
this context.
continue, Mustafa.
Yeah. Sorry.
Your thoughts on it.
I was basically done. And so, I mean, you read stories from Risala al-Qushayriya, where, you have these murids just saying words like, "Qut," just like they just need some food, right? And they're isolated, and they will have cases of them, because they were so distraught from not having food and not sleeping. Some of them would rub soil into their eyes until they went blind, and then the sheikh would come and rub over their eyes and make a dua. These are all stories that exist in Risala al-Qushayriya and other such books on Sufism. And so the idea of someone being a part of a Sufi tariqa and then complaining about spiritual abuse as per this standardized definition that's given at the start of the Muslim Matters article is really rather silly. I mean, if you're not up for it, then just leave. There's no big deal. Oh, but we will be perceived as non-Muslims. No, that's not true. That's simply not true. I myself heard Shaykh Nuh saying in a public lesson in the Zawiya that as for people who leave the tariqa, they remain our brothers in Islam, but a murid's priorities are to spend time or keep the company of those who benefit them in their spiritual path. And so really, crybaby snowflakes, is that too strong? Am I allowed to say that?
Perfect.
Well,
that's why Sim loves you.
Alhamdulillah.
Some of this stuff is gets amplified by people who were kind of against Sufism and this whole. People always kind of viewed the whole Zawiya, that neighborhood in Jordan, with a little suspicion, and it kind of gave them some ammo, and
right,
because they kind of viewed it as a cult, right? I mean, let's just kind of put out there the word was. The Sufi cults that are, is it? I mean, how do you respond to that term? Is it a cult in the Zawiya or no?
Some people treated it as a cult, but maybe we could start with the definition of a cult.
Yeah, because Islam
can you
in
tell me what a cult is?
Islam in its origins could be a cult, right?
Some people do actually. The haters of Islam call Islam a cult because they
Well-
say if you leave it, there's like repercussions, right, or whatever it is, right? And so they threaten
Right.
repercussions. So they say that's one of the attributes of a cult. So technically, you can
Right.
define any of these religions or anything similar to a cult. So the cult,
Well,
the term
I
cult
think
is
in being
loose.
fair, a Sufi tariqa, regardless, will always have a little bit more of a cult-like element because I think the key point is it's focusing on a personality, right? On a person. And so in that sense, the Shaykh of a tariqa, are all Sufi tariqas cults? So I'm asking again, what is a cult? And once we define that,
Yeah, how would you define
I
a
would
cult?
say because I gave it a lot of thought because I was thinking about the differences between why the major religions compared to something like Scientology or something.
Right.
And I thought that the cult mainly has they both share, a very charismatic religious type leader who's giving them a set of code and values to live by. The only difference I would say is that the cult is a much smaller subset of society. It's not as great in number as a religion or a major religion is. The cults, I think, I think basically.
So what if I read out the
Yeah, go
definition?
ahead.
You tell me if you guys agree.
Yeah.
Right. There's two definitions. A system of religious veneration and devotion directed toward a particular figure or object, right? Or a relatively small group of people having religious beliefs or practices regarded by others as strange or sinister, quote, a network of Satan worshipping cults, end quote. Like
So basically, just like I said, a smaller subset of society, similar to a religion, but it just hasn't been adopted widely. The reason why I think some people will call places like Sheikh Nuh's neighborhood in Jordan a cult is because it's all revolving around him. Even though he's part of the Islamic family or the Muslim Ummah and etc., but Sheikh Nuh is the one who's defining all their actions and the way they worship, how they worship, and gives them direction in things related to their worldly life, whether who they should marry, how many kids they should have, what kind of home they should buy. This is not just Sheikh Nuh, by the way. This is many other Sufi leaders who we have a couple like that in Chicago who are very venerated, and they have they do a lot too. I'm not like dissing them. I'm just saying that they have a much larger presence in your personal life than for example, a Salafi Sheikh or a Tablighi Sheikh or any etc. Right? The Sufi Sheikh that we're talking about, and now we're not talking about all Sufis, but certain types of Sufis who have a much larger impact on your personal life than a regular Sheikh would,
Right. So some comments. First of all, I liked Sim's definition of cult because it allowed me to say categorically that the community here is not a cult, because he said it centers around a charismatic leader. And Sheikh Nuh is highly introverted and highly intellectual and rather dry. So definitely not a charismatic leader. So therefore, based on Sim's definition of what a cult is, no, this is not a cult. Based on the two definitions that Morty mentioned, the first one does not apply because we don't venerate or worship anyone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And actually, even the actual tariqa of Abu al-Hasan al-Shadhili, even though the issue of tawassul is a fiqhi issue, but Abu al-Hasan al-Shadhili, regardless of it being acceptable according to many fuqaha, didn't practice it because the Shadhilis are zatiyun. They are people who are who are focused on the entity of Allah, and so they do not, as a general practice, engage in tawassul. So no, there's not even it's veneration of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second definition was a small group Could you repeat that again? A small
Yeah, a
group?
relatively small group of people having religious beliefs or practices regarded by others as strange or sinister.
That may apply. In all honesty, that may apply to various different Sufi tariqas, including our own. I mean, there are some beliefs that some people may consider strange, primarily because of just how little Islamic knowledge there is, or practices like the Sufi Hadra, which is permitted in the Shafi'i school. I mean, if you want, I can quote Imam Nawawi's Minhaj, that indicates that dancing is permissible. And so dancing as a permissible act, when combined with something else permissible, such as dhikr, or which is actually an act of worship, or, for example, devotional singing, does not become haram. So, but these practices people find odd, alienating. So maybe under that definition, if we want to just apply the definition blindly, maybe we are a cult, and I'm okay with that.
So I think what happens though is that, so there are, I think people understand that I think people who are against have a different position. They lump all groups of Sophia together, right? Like, for example,
Right.
I've had my experiences, right? Like, I've been around with people like the Haqqanis, the Naqshbandis, and to me, without a shadow of a doubt, they're a cult. I mean, I've been embedded with
Okay.
them. I stayed in their farm. I mean, to me, they're a cult 100%. Like the type of thing they
Okay.
would do, the type of even, like, just the idea of even having to, like, it's just, I mean, I don't want to get into details when I make the show about that right now, but certainly the practices by this definition would be a cult, meaning that, that it
Right.
certainly has strange practices that you would find. Forget about even just the hadra. I'm talking about other things that are outside of that you would know that are not even traditionally what the traditional tasawwuf is about, right? They've incorporated some of those. And I think people take those examples and then lump them with everybody and say, well, they all must have the same belief, right? And whether or not I'm part of it or agree with it or not is something different. But to be accurate, that they don't all have the same beliefs, and I don't think we can lump them all together. And that's dangerous because
Absolutely.
we don't want people to be lumped together.
Absolutely. But you know what? I think that a lot of this is, from my perspective, a red herring, because the people that I have an issue with are the people who wrote these articles who are deracinated Sufis. And so I'm not concerned with those who hate Sufism so much. I mean, I'm concerned with those who saw what they saw, or saw what they claim to have seen, experienced what they have claimed to have experienced, failed their families, failed their children, and then went off like a bunch of snotty little crybabies and wrote this long article. That should be illegal. If
I agree.
something is a crime,
Yes.
something is a crime, either take it to the courts or shut up. But doing cancel culture. I mean, just imagine that there's an imam of a mosque that that's really pious, and then people just start claiming that he rapes women, or I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but imagine trying to clear his name after those allegations.
Agreed.
Yeah.
How on
Agreed.
earth would you clear his name?
Yeah,
Right.
so
And this is why we have the punishment for qadh in Islam. I'm not suggesting that this is an extension of qadh. I'm just saying that if you don't have if you have proof, take it to the courts, because they are the ones that are capable of dealing with it. And if you don't have proof, then shut up.
Right. So how much of this do you and I love that point, because we're not here to talk about whether Sufism is right or wrong. This isn't the issue. The issue is that regardless of whether someone's right or wrong in their beliefs, is it permissible to slander somebody publicly without evidence, or is it appropriate to do so without first going to authorities? Right. And I think we can all agree here, for the most part, that no, we don't believe in that. However, I believe personally, Mustafa, that there's a narrative now coming, especially from the Western world, that, especially with the push of liberalism, that you have to believe all these allegations, especially from one gender to the other, right? There should be no question.
Right.
If you question this, you are a scumbag.
Yeah.
Because how dare why would someone make that up? And I think, I want to know from your perspective, how much of this cancel culture do you think will influence what they just did right now? Because it seems to me that this is a textbook, a case of cancel culture.
Yeah, I believe that there were certain There were certain actions that were done, not by Shaykh Nuh himself, but by others, that were not acceptable. But was there a cancel culture? I think that they themselves had submitted to, and I really, if anything comes out of this talk, what I'd like people to do is to find the YouTube video on where that discusses Bonhoeffer's theory of stupidity, right? And how stupidity is an immoral choice. So they chose to adopt a cult mentality that made them feel that they would be dirty, that they would be bad, that they would be essentially, like me, if they complained. And then when they couldn't handle it anymore, they just blew up. Be the guy that goes in and flips people off, and don't be the guy that goes in and shoots people.
One of the things that just surprised me was that, as a parent, if someone is hitting your child, it's especially when you're trying to get your child to be interested in Islam and the faith, and you're trying to get them, excited about it. And as a parent, I would be like, this is not my thing. This is maybe some other parents want their kids to be, they want their kids to be educated. They're okay with that type of education. But there's no way I would want my kids, because I've been through that when I was younger, and I was like, it made me want to not be, so close to the religion, at least when I was young. So I am really averse to that. And the moment that happens, I would be like, honey, we made a mistake coming to this country, and I think we should go back, or maybe we find a different teacher.
Oh, say, can you?
I mean, why would you just, for how many years were you part of this? And then you're like, oh, well, we tried to bring it up and no one listened to us.
Like, I mean, if you see your child getting abused, right? I don't care. I mean, look, if you claim it's abuse, right? Let's just be, it's a,
or if you feel that was considered abuse.
If you feel that was abuse, right?
Yeah.
The first thing anybody would do, a smart and intelligent person, a critical thinker, would say, wait a minute, this is not for me. Maybe it's a culture here. Maybe they agree. I don't have to even condemn the culture, but it's not my culture. It's not for me. So I'm going to pull out, right? You don't, if you go to a place where it's set up already, right? You don't go try to just change the whole damn thing, right? Like that's just, it's already established. You don't like for example, if people go to places in the Middle Eastern world and they want to make hijrah. They don't like the way things are. They come back. They don't try to change the whole society, right? It's just not the way it is.
Yeah.
One of the funny things is
it's like going to a Desi restaurant and complaining that the food's spicy. I mean, like the rules for how the community is run in Kharabsha are all public. Like you people you all read, you all understood that Shaykh Nuh says, look, these are the rules that we live by. Now, another thing is that I tend to be a little bit weird. I have fond memories of getting hit by my Desi schoolmaster, and Desis are like really beloved to me, and that's just part of me growing up. It's like the master. I won't mention what his name was, but he started the Muslim school in Vancouver, and like he's like one of my role models, and a lot of people are like he used to beat the kids. I was like, yeah, I know, and so as long as it doesn't go outside the bounds of the Sharia, I'm okay with it.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I'm just like you. To be honest, I think when I was younger, I do think those little spankings, those things, they help character build, right? And it's just, I'm not saying that abuse should be tolerated like you. I mean, there's certain people who go above and beyond and should not be allowed.
Of course, right.
But, I mean, this has just been a tradition for centuries.
12 of the 50 states still have corporal punishment in the United States.
That's
they're part of the
So one
I'm not saying they do it, but it's part of the.
No, yeah,
right.
It's legal.
And so I'm not defending anything that goes beyond the Sharia.
Sure, same here.
So one observation that I had, Mustafa, is actually there's two things. I wanted to ask you this in the beginning by saying that, look, madrasas have had this system all along, and parents willingly send their kids to madrasas, and parents who know that there's physical conditioning in madrasas, they just won't send them to that madrasa, and they know that. Everybody knows that, right? But
correct.
One thing that I understood from the articles and what people generally say about Qarabsha and Shaykh Nuh is that people have complained about things that were originally not allowed by teachers and nothing was actually being done about it, right? So that's one of the claims.
Okay.
The claim is that it wasn't ever allowed to physically condition children. I don't know if that was true or not. That's why I think we have you
Okay.
here. And the second part is that even though it wasn't allowed, these complaints were taken up to the top and nothing was done by it. That's why we're publishing this article.
Well, the couple that was running the school were asked to leave the high, and the school was dissolved, and so that's what I know.
Cool. All right.
So my understanding is that this was actually not technically a school, right? I mean, it was referred to as one, but it was not officially registered as
That's
a
why I
school.
called the cops on them.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah.
So they were operating as one, but they were not officially a school, and so that violated. They were not bound by regulation, I guess, in that sense.
Correct.
Okay.
Nice.
So that could lead to problems with things written down. But my biggest thing though is that I think they had to know. I mean, is there like a handbook you get when you move in here, like a homeowners association, where hey, you can't do this and you can't do that? I'm sure they must have signed something or been like, or agreed to at least verbally.
No, but
like,
I think that's what he's saying. That's kind
I mean,
of.
are you kidding me? There's like these drones that have like their proms are programmed, so if you ever violate, they just pays you, right? But they had to stop that. They had to stop that because I told them like from the electrotherapy, I got so used to it while I was institutionalized that I started enjoying it. So they just stopped tasing me. So I'm being sarcastic. So yes, there is a handbook called As a Rule, and everything's written in there.
Oh wow!
So and it's published. You can Google this.
Yeah.
So do they get this as like a welcome package if they're planning prospective like movers who are moving over there or wanting to join? Do they have this information beforehand and then they look through it? I mean, or how does that work?
Generally, I mean, I moved here in 2006, so it was quite a while ago. But there was always the understanding that there were certain rules of the Hay that you lived by, and there was always the understanding if you had, an active brain that this was a part of Jordan, and so nothing was binding other than Jordanian law.
Correct. Yeah, and a part of me has to think this too, because I'm thinking about this as a parent, or rationally at least thinking, as a thinking human being. You're probably moving to this place from another. And before I say that, I'm going to say probably majority of the people that are complaining about this probably never really lived in the Middle East or understood that culture in the first place. They have a different cultural understanding. But that being said, I have a feeling, I have a hunch that many of them wanted to move to be in a more quote unquote Islamic environment in the first place.
Of course they did.
Right?
Correct.
So what do you expect? Like, I mean, what do you think that everything was going to be the same as it was from the place that you left?
No, but
like,
look at the audience that they're addressing. They're talking to the Western English-speaking audience that finds these things very corrosive and very. If imagine if this Middle East Eye, whatever was published in it, or Muslim Matters was published in the Middle East, no one cares. So
tell them Somalia and the Dixie.
Oh, this is actually hilarious because you just reminded me of something. So in British Columbia, there was a Shaykh who. Attracted the attention of the authorities because he made some unsavory statements about our cousins, the Jewish nation. And when I first came to Jordan, they said, "Okay, you're Canadian and you're from the same province as him. So tell us about him." And so I'm not going to snitch him out. I'm just going to say what was mentioned on the front page of newspapers, right? So that way, I don't look like I'm withholding information. Anyhow, I don't know the guy personally. I don't look like I'm withholding information, and at the same time, I'm not snitching him out because it was on the front page of newspapers. I said, well, he said that they were the descendants of pigs and of pigs and apes, and the mukhabarat were there waiting, like, okay, when does the juicy part come? They're just waiting for what's next. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so their understanding, they were so. I'm not defending that at all. I'm saying that the understanding here and the cultural reflection or cultural values can be quite different than they are in the West.
Yeah, I mean,
So basically, you were someone who had moved on to you migrated from Canada, right? And
Correct.
can you walk us through your process? Because many brothers nowadays are discussing leaving the West and coming to